Let's make some noise for Dan Casetta.
Thanks, everyone. And what an amazing event this has been over these last couple days. And what an impactful organization we have here with One Life. And my message today is not about the power of One Life, the organization. It's about the power of one life. And I direct that at each and every one of you, because one life can make all the difference for so many others if we see our opportunities and we act on them. All of us are here today because of the power of one life. One man, Tim Rhode. Tim didn't have to do this. Yeah, he did not have to do this. He had already made it in life. Successful realtor, turned profitable real estate investor, raised 3 children, retired at age 40. He had made it. He did not have to pour his blood, sweat, and tears into the creation of an organization that would impact so many people in so many positive ways. And yet here he is doing just that. One life, one man, making so much difference. Can we hear it for Tim Rhode? As Brother James mentioned, I work for a company called Cutco. Are there any Cutco fans out here? All right. Awesome. This is a company that has really repositioned itself from being one that sells knives to one that develops people. And there are literally legions of successful entrepreneurs and business leaders out there today who credit Cutco as having provided them with the foundation to build a great life. There's people you know like John Vroman and Kathy Kristen and Brother James himself and Hal Elrod and so many others. Yes, this little company that sells knives is truly changing lives. But it almost didn't happen. In 1984, the parent company, Alcoa, had to divest itself of some of its parts. And some genius in Alcoa decided there was no future for their Cutco sales subsidiary. And so the company was to be sold and the assets liquidated and the factory would be closed down. But one man decided that was not going to happen. His name was Eric Lane. And Eric put together a team of families who performed a highly leveraged buyout of the company. They literally risked everything in their lives to be able to buy the company from Alcoa. And they almost didn't make it. There were a couple of years of struggle. But after a couple of years, they turned the corner and they began growing year over year into the successful and impactful organization that they are today. One life, one man, Eric Lane, made all the difference. When I was a little boy, we were in the midst of the Cold War, and the threat of a nuclear holocaust was literally gripping the nation. If you're anything over 40 years old in this room, you might remember a TV movie called The Day After that depicted the scene after a nuclear war had happened. Well, in 1986, the 2 most important world leaders got together to see if they could move the world away from this possibility. They were Mikhail Gorbachev of the Soviet Union and U.S. President Ronald Reagan. It was in Iceland, and it was literally on October 12th of that year that they met. And you could picture the scene. A long conference table, Reagan and his team on one side, Gorbachev and his team on the other side. And at one point during the conference, Gorbachev was so angry that he stood up and he was pounding the table, screaming and spitting across the table. The summit was in danger of collapsing, except for the skills of one man. Because you see, Ronald Reagan, he was known as the great what? Communicator. The great communicator. He understood people. And politics aside, he had profound skills of influence. He looked across the table, and you know what he said? He said, "Mikhail, let's go for a walk." And the two men wandered outside onto the grounds of the conference center. Well, tucked away on those grounds was a small cottage. And that cottage had a fireplace and a couch and far less adversarial setting. And because the formal part of the summit had essentially ended in failure, or so they thought, Reagan and Gorbachev were free to sit in that cottage without advisors, just their interpreters. And as the story is told, over the next few hours in that very cottage, the seeds were planted, which would eventually result in the end of the Cold War. Not long after that, the Soviet Union broke up. Over a dozen new countries were formed or reformed. The Berlin Wall came down. All of Europe was transformed. One man, one life made all the difference. And there have been so many other one lives that have made a big difference. In 1955, one woman refused to give up her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, and Rosa Parks became the first lady of civil rights. In 1989, one young man stood in front of a column of tanks leaving Tiananmen Square in Beijing and provided us with this iconic moment in world history. This photo is burned into so many of our minds as a symbol of the fight for freedom. And if you think you're too young to make a difference, on November 16th, 1960, Ruby Bridges walked into a classroom, becoming the first African American to desegregate an all-white school in Louisiana. Led by federal marshals, past a crowd that was jeering and throwing stuff at her, she walked into that class with total composure and courage. It was first grade, and Ruby was just 6 years old. What all of these people had in common was that they believed in something that was bigger than themselves, and they had the courage to act on that belief. And when I think of one life that can impact so many others, I think of every single one of us in this room here today. And if you're wondering what you can do, here's how you can change the world. Cultivate an unshakable character for doing what's right. Stand up for the things that you believe in, even in the face of fear. And then do something, anything, something that can make a difference. Do what you can. No single raindrop ever considered itself responsible for the flood, but small actions accumulated can make a huge difference. And last, I encourage you to work on your craft, especially as it pertains to communication and influence, so that when you speak, people are moved to action. That, my friends, is how your one life can be fully lived. Thank you.